Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dynasty Underdog. I'm your host, Uriah Dawkins. With me tonight, Jake Kornblum, also known as at Jake Abrams. What's up, man?
Dude, I'm doing well. No complaints. Don't really know what we're doing here. Like, what is a show without Billy? Oh, wait, we did this like 5 weeks in a row last year. So
We did.
we got
Yeah,
practice, I think.
I mean, content was a little easier to come up with, in season last year, but yeah, I mean, we could do this. We don't need Billy.
We got this. Even though he created like most of the show sheet, but it's fine. It's like he's here, but he's not here. It's weird, but it's all good.
Shout out Billy.
Shout out Billy.
All right, so we'll hop into some news nonsense. There's other news stuff I'm sure that maybe you could come up with. I mean, there's tons of stuff on there we have training camps going on, folks getting in fights, DK hitting people with helmets, shit like that. But let's just hop into it. So what we have here is there's more nonsense in news, but how much does quarterback play impact elite player evaluations? And for me, this doesn't even seem like a huge topic to me. Like Justin Jefferson's good, right? Like we saw him without a quote unquote good quarterback, and he was still pretty good. So it's just I think that talent at that level, I don't think it matters once you're really that elite player. Like he has listed here JJ and DeAndre Hopkins, and DeAndre Hopkins has played with so many terrible quarterbacks, and it just never seemed to really matter. How do you feel about that? Are you going to knock somebody down because the quarterback they have?
Or typically, no. No, if anything, I think we're seeing it with guys like Garrett Wilson or Drake London, where you are elevating these players already to a certain height, and then they get a better quarterback situation, and then they kind of just expedite their value at such an extreme level that you're just like, is this realistic? Like, does this seem feasible? But I think for the most part, we're going to find out that yes, most realistically, yes, both Drake London and Garrett Wilson, once they actually play with, Aaron Rodgers, rest in peace last year. But, the idea was for him to be playing with an elite quarterback. That's kind of where I sit. I just don't believe that elite players really get held back by their quarterbacks. And it's funny, Billy doesn't list Malik Neighbors. I think Malik Neighbors is going to show the world truly this year that he is going to be an elite wide receiver as long as he can stay healthy, regardless of the quarterback play. I think it's just simple situation where if you're decent enough, and most NFL teams, even at bottom tier, will throw over 3,500 yards, right? Like that's pretty low barometer. He's good enough to at least attribute to slightly over, I would say, a quarter. So touching right around that 1,000-yard mark.
Yep.
And that's what an elite receiver does in a quote unquote bad offense. Now, when you can elevate that to, 4,500 yards or 4,200 yards, like that's kind of where they end up performing at their most elite, especially if they don't have a lot of competitors. But in most of these situations, like Malik isn't going to have a ton of target share that he's going to have to worry about, like Jalen Hyatt, Wan'Dale Robinson, Theo Johnson, it's just not really the case. So he's honestly the guy that I would be most kind of intrigued about of, will we be able to kind of give him that title of elite wide receiver? Because that's how he's coming out of college and being defined coming into his rookie year. What about you?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Neighbors, because he's definitely a guy I don't see a way where he doesn't become an elite talent in the NFL level. Like he was elite in college.
Yep.
The training camp hype is what it is, but he's doing it consistently all the time. And Daniel Jones is not an elite tier quarterback, right?
Yep.
But if you could throw the ball to somebody like Malik 10 times a game and 70% are on target, he's going to catch probably 7 of those balls, right? So I don't really think it matters. We did this. This is what I was thinking about. We did this with Mike Evans.
Yes.
Because everyone thinks that Baker Mayfield sucks, right? Well, it didn't seem to matter too much, right? Baker Mayfield is an accurate enough passer. I think that's kind of the biggest thing is accuracy. As long as the ball is getting placed in the area that the elite wide receiver could go up and get it, elite wide receivers will go up and get it. So it doesn't really affect me too much. What scares me most is when they get that bump that you were talking about earlier, like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
now he's got a better quarterback. It's like, well, I don't know. I feel like elite wide receivers can elevate a bad quarterback more than a good quarterback could elevate bad receivers.
Yeah, that's completely fair. We do have a comment from AJ just bringing up Njoku and how he kind of was able to elevate with Flacco. Was that really a situation where we think that Flacco was truly that quote unquote bad quarterback play with an elite tight end? Or do you think that it was kind of a nice homogenous relationship between, relatively elevated tight end play and a quarterback who probably wasn't necessarily as cooked as people thought he was?
It probably has a lot to do with like quarterback preference.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So I mean, you have Deshaun Watson, or whatever. Like he's gonna prefer to throw the ball, outside the left hash, about 15 yards downfield, or you know what I mean. He might
Yeah.
prefer to throw to a certain target. I think that Flacco said, "Hey, Njoku's getting open. I like chucking it down to this guy." So I think it's just more of a quarterback preference. That's probably what happened there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's probably it hits every spot except for maybe Olave. And I think Olave is in a unique circumstance. Do you think that Olave is elite? Do you think he's just under that
Mm.
threshold of elite? What is his circumstance with in your mind? And does Derek Carr hold him back, or is this really just a reality that maybe Chris Olave isn't as good as a lot of people think he is?
I think Chris Olave is a really good wide receiver. But I think I just don't. I wouldn't put that elite tag on him, right? And is Derek Carr helping? Probably not, but he's been able to produce, you know, feed really good elite wide receivers. He's been able to have uh, decent production out of the wide receiver position based on his play. You can knock him because he's also not one of those quote unquote elite quarterbacks. But I think Olave, as much as I hate to say it, I don't think that he's ever going to be like a top 10 wide receiver.
Yeah, I do feel like Olave is in that circumstance where he needs a specific style of quarterback to truly excel. And we almost saw it with like the little stints of Jameis Winston that would come in throughout the year. It was really funny. Like Carr would get injured in the fourth quarter. Winston would have maybe like 2 series. And of course, in those 2 series, Olave would catch like 3 or 4 passes for 65 yards. And,
Yeah.
you know, in the grand scheme of things, it's really about also circumstance in the game. More often than not, they're probably losing. They're airing out the ball significantly more. There's other things for us to be conscientious of rather than just like, ooh, my stats. It wasn't as simple as that. But in the grand scheme of things, I do agree with you. I think Olave kind of fades just outside of that quote unquote elite level. And I don't know if he necessarily is always going to be technically improving his quarterback play or necessarily being able to evade poor quarterback play. So, yeah.
All right. It reminds me of like Blake Bortles. I think Blake Bortles had
Good shout.
who did he have? He
Wasn't that
had
Allen Robinson?
and Alan Hearns. Do you
Yes,
remember
yes,
that? And I think there was a
yes.
season where they both went over 1,000.
Yep.
And it's not like you really none of them were like super elite. But Bortles was not super elite, but the volume was there. Like I said, if you could throw them 10 times and 8 of them were catchable, you're gonna get fantasy points. So I always
That's a
think
good
about
point.
that when people talk about bad offenses being bad for fantasy. It's like, well, sometimes really shitty offenses are pretty good for fantasy too.
Yep. Yeah, Allen Hearns, former Hurricane. Yep, shout out. Shout out. Yeah,
Shout
we're
out.
going deep today.
Alan Hearns was supposed to be Dak Prescott's wide receiver 1 in his second year, by the way.
In college?
No, on the Cowboys.
Oh, I didn't even realize that he had moved over to Dallas. Is that when
Yeah,
his
for like
career kind of faltered?
he got hurt too. So,
Yeah.
but they were going to roll him out as wide receiver 1 and Cole Beasley as like Terrence Williams. I hate my team. All right, so Puka versus Roma Dunze in Dynasty. So I kind of like this one. How do you parse evaluations between what is known and what could be? You have a top 10 pick versus a sixth round pick who is made by the quarterback coach. So I think we got to stop looking at Puka as being a sixth round pick now. Like
Sure.
clearly things were just missed. But I guess probably what he's trying to wonder is like, if we had to choose right now, like, who would you rather have in your team, Puka or Roma Dunze? Now, I personally believe Roma Dunze's game is better than Puka's. I don't think we would have seen what we saw from Puka last year if you didn't have Sean McVay and Matt Stafford. So, but I wouldn't risk moving someone like Puka that we saw do what he did in his rookie year in order to tier over to Odunze until we've seen him on the field. I just think that that's kind of that's a big risk.
Yeah, I agree. And especially when you know for a fact having that similar production is going to be incredibly challenging in his rookie year.
Yes.
Just like, let's just call a spade a spade. I'm not telling you that he's going to have JSN rookie numbers. I'm just saying that, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where there's only so many passes that can be thrown in this Bears offense. And there are so many mouths to feed. I know it's a very common trope that's been talked about, but it is a reality. And so
Sure.
even if somehow all three wide receivers catch 1,000 yards, they're pulling each other down by doing that. So you still don't get that same production that you would get out of Puka this upcoming year. So, like, what are you trying to do with your team if you're, kind of having these players in similar tiers? And to your point, it is a tier down, obviously. What is that tier down to you? Like, what is that equivalent? What's the gap? And how do you fill that gap between Puka to Odunze? And when would you do it?
See, the thing is, I don't think I would want to take that risk. Probably value wise is something like a Dunze and a couple seconds, or a Dunze and even like a first. Like Puka was balling out, right? Honestly, I think I probably would have tried to sell Puka a long time ago to not be in the situation. But I can't take that kind of gamble. If I didn't pick up a Dunze in my rookie draft, I'm not trying to look for any type of deal whatsoever to really move my Puka for an Dunze, right? I think if I don't have an Dunze right now, I'm gonna go ahead and wait and see. And then it'll go back to what we're gonna talk about later. Like if Odunze does Puka type stuff in his rookie year, which I think is going to be really, really hard to do, even probably 80% of that.
Yeah.
Then I'll go ahead and say, okay, this dude's a real deal, and then I'll spend up for it. But I think personally, me with my team right now, I wouldn't even be looking to do that.
Yeah, that's completely reasonable. I think this is a really interesting question. How many Rome shareholders are contenders, though? It's funny when like we start to try and think about how people acquire certain assets, and there's a lot of times where you can get in, and to your highest point in the past, acquiring future firsts from other teams 2-3 years out can become very advantageous for you if you're a contending team. You put yourself in a situation where you potentially are acquiring what someone thinks is their contending team for the next 5 years. Turns out they were only able to contend for 2 years. And that, in their head, 111 in 2027, which they can't predict, turns into the 105. Guess what? The team that just won first place in 2023, or in 2026 in this example, now has the 105 the next year, or the 104, and they want to go get Rome. Like, it is plausible. It isn't that far-fetched for those types of deals to occur, because they actually do. They're probably less frequent near startups. So, year 1 to year 2, that doesn't typically happen. But the further you get along in your dynasty campaign for your league, I think those types of deals happen all the time, because everyone's trying to think that they can compete for the next however many years, because that's the idea, right? It's dynasty. I think I can compete for the next 5, when
we
it
all
just maybe doesn't happen, And I do think that there are plenty of Rome shareholders that are probably contenders, and they're probably in a very interesting situation right now, trying to figure out, what do you do with Rome? Like, do you go out there and do you start him? If you're a contender, that means that the rest of your roster should be startable. But is this a type of player that you want to throw in week 1? I'd say probably not, just to be realistic. Even if you did spend a top 5-6 pick on him, it's just a reality of the circumstance to what we were talking about before. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just to that, this would be a situation where I think that maybe if I truly was contending and I ended up with a Dunze via the way that you had proposed, maybe I would go ahead and try to do the opposite of what we're talking about. Instead of moving off of Puka to get to Rome, maybe I use Rome while he still hasn't had his value diminished because of poor play or lack of targets or bad camp news, and maybe put on top for somebody like Puka. So I think you can probably get that done.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's a great point. And I guess that really does go full circle with Billy's point of, how do you then compare the top 10 pick versus the 6th round pick in terms of their production? Is the reality is one player has produced in the NFL. You know that for a fact.
Yes.
It's a God-given fact. The other guy hasn't. He can go out tomorrow and tear his ACL. God forbid. I'm not saying that.
Why would you do that?
I'm just saying it's a possibility, and you just don't know the circumstances. And the circumstances can happen all across the board. By all means, it can happen to a proven veteran as well. But the reality is that Puka has done in the NFL. You know that Puka has done it with Stafford. You know Stafford is the quarterback this year, and that is the reality. I think that's what we kind of see. So it's a good conversation. I don't know if we necessarily have to dive any further, but it's so much to try and think about of, how do you compare quote unquote draft capital in the NFL to long-standing value in Dynasty? I just don't think once a player excels and succeeds, you have to really be that conscientious of it personally.
Yeah, it's like the Antonio Brown rule. Like, it was 5th round pick, right? I don't think
exactly.
After the first couple of years, like anybody cared, right? So
yeah, I spoke it into existence. Sorry, Joe. Joe's upset that I said what I said about Rome doing his knee.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Moving on. So this is a good question. It's somebody I haven't even like really thought about much since the rookie draft, but the camp hype's pretty good. Like, the question is, have we been too low on JT Sanders? Tight end, Carolina, super athletic. Right now in camp, he's starting tight end for Bryce Young, former first overall pick. Do you think, I mean, right now his value is probably pretty low still. Are you going to buy into the fact that he's super athletic? He's on a team that needs other pass catchers that could move. Adam Thielen can't keep doing what he was doing.
We keep saying it.
Mingo's not, he's probably not it. Xavier Legette is a little banged up, dog. But I think, I mean, even if it's until Xavier Legette comes around and starts getting better, he's definitely a better wide receiver than Mingo. But I think we could see like the first few weeks where JT Sanders is the second target on this team. Whether we think that Bryce Young could be good or not in the Canals offense, I think it's worth experimenting with. I think it's worth taking a chance and seeing what the JT Sanders owner is willing to move off the guy for right now. Because if he'd been like me, he might be sleeping the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a good point. I honestly haven't really ever thought of JT Sanders outside of the rookie drafts, mainly because early rookie season, we're talking probably 2 months before the NFL draft, JT Sanders was somewhere hovering around the late 2nd round for a lot of, actually even sometimes mid-2nd round in a lot of rookie mocks that I was looking at. Post-draft, for whatever reason, definitely started to fade towards late 2nd, early 3rd.
Yep.
Ben Sinnott news was starting to get a lot of people excited about that situation. I don't really know. I don't believe in camp hype. I know it sounds really stupid, but I just don't really buy into a lot of it. And that's maybe my own demise. We are looking at JT Sanders as tight end 21.
Okay.
He's at 207 overall. Looking at, let's see, tight end premium. Let me pull all the way over to his rank. I'm going to bet just based on the number, he's going to be around some pretty terrible players. We're talking, Oh, he jumped up because I put on tight end premium. Give me one sec. We're talking Jalen McMillan, who's gotten a ton of camp hype as well. Michael Wilson, ton of camp hype as well. DeAndre Hopkins, not a ton of camp hype because he's 32 years old, but you're talking about probably wide receiver 1 come week 2 or 3 of the NFL season post his minor knee sprain. Curtis Samuel getting a ton of hype in Buffalo. Audric Estime, Troy Franklin, and a late 26 second. You take in JT Sanders over any of those guys?
Shoot, who was the first guy you were listening to?
Jalen McMillan.
Yeah, I think I'd do that because I don't think there's room for McMillan in this offense. Not right now. I think there's room for JT Sanders starting week 1 to produce. So I think I would do that.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely see a swap like that. I think it would be challenging, mainly because there's a chance that the JT Sanders owner probably drafted JT Sanders ahead of Jalen McMillan in their rookie draft. So what's the likelihood that they're going to want to trade back? And then adding a plus on that feels a little steep just because there is so much hype on Jalen McMillan right now that you could probably get better value. Just like I said, you can get a 26 late second for McMillan. You're probably getting him, late 3rd, maybe even early 4th, depending on your league. Ooh, that feels like good value to me. Oh, man. The rest of this group, I don't know. DeAndre Hopkins, personally, for that value, I think I'd rather keep Hopkins.
Yep.
Michael Wilson, I'd go JT Sanders over Michael Wilson.
Same.
Outside of that, Javon Baker in New England?
I couldn't do it.
No? Okay.
Camp hype's
well,
I just got to see.
Okay. There's a lot of excitement there. That's fair. Jacoby Myers, Las Vegas.
I know I could flex Jacoby pretty much every week.
Yep. Yeah. So, Kendre Miller. He's like 10 above. I would go Kendre. I'll send Kendre for JT Sanders immediately.
God, I want to see what happens with him.
Nothing's going to happen with him.
Probably not.
I hate the fact, like, he has so much anti-coach speak around him from Dennis Allen. Like, I've never heard a coach hate a player as much as he hates Kendre Miller.
Dennis
it's the weirdest
Allen's a
thing.
Fucking piece of shit, though. So who cares?
I hope you're listening, Dennis.
He's a bad person. So, all right, let's move on. So, are we worthy? I like this. So, are we undervaluing Xavier Worthy's? I love how you guys like Billy's amazing, guys. You have to see the show sheet sometimes, but perspective value. He says the value created by one's own lofty perspective on a situation, not often accounting for the downside. A player unlikely to be able to trade for at a reasonable price due to the situation, but whose price would significantly increase if you were to see more versatile like Kadarius Toney. Are we undervaluing Xavier Worthy? I don't think so. It seems like he's probably valued a little higher than he should be because he's with Mahomes. Like it or not, Mahomes has 3 really good receiving options right now. He's got Rice. He's got Kelsey. And he has Hollywood Brown. You can't tell me Xavier Worthy deserves more targets than either of those 3 right now. Will he eventually? Maybe, but I don't think we're undervaluing him at this point in time. No.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think this is very much the antithesis to what happened with Rashee Rice. Obviously, draft capital is really important in this conversation, but it was almost like we wanted to fade Rashee Rice for obvious reasons. I do think that there's a lot to his game that is relatively limited. You see that with his route tree in his rookie year. I was definitely one of the first Rashee Rice truthers on DU. You remember our in-season conversations? We covered a lot of his up-to-date statistics on why I thought that he was actually venturing in a more productive role throughout the season, which thankfully, knock on wood, I didn't look like an asshole, and he did. So that's great.
It happens.
But I think this is the overcorrection we tend to do in a lot of the market, where we see one example work really, really well in Kansas City, and therefore we think the next one with higher draft capital has to hit immediately. And to your point, they did bring in Hollywood Brown. I do think that Xavier Worthy does have a lot more robustness to his game than Rashee Rice, but that doesn't mean that I think he's just going to simply take away his targets immediately. Like there is going to be some type of contingency plan that happens that you end up working through to get Xavier Worthy into that offense and accessible. Otherwise, you're just kind of going in with blind optimism that this guy is going to really, really turn this offense around when they just won a Super Bowl. So it's like, why change something that, they really just improved upon? Moving from what was in their wide receiver room last year to this wide receiver room is truly they've multiplied efficiency probably by like 10x.
Okay. I think there's going to be a situation within the first few weeks of the season where Xavier Worthy is going to be a stale to some people, and they're going to be one move up. So if you're Xavier Worthy truther and you do buy into it, and I think he really will fit nicely into that offense at some point. I just don't think it's going to happen early.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a point where we could actually buy at a discount compared to today. But for the question though, I don't think we're undervaluing him yet. If anything, maybe overvaluing him.
I think that's a really good point. AJ with his forever jokes. We got Rashee Rice. That's pretty offensive, but that's okay.
Crash, yeah. I mean, it's accurate though. I mean, you look anywhere who has like any type of stigma to them or a nickname, they're not far off.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. That's why they call me Jake Abrams. But yeah, I think we cover the news and nonsense pretty well.
I hate to admit, I had no idea who Jake Abrams was until like you came into my life and I had to figure out why is he calling himself Jake Abrams. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like a famous
director, yeah, and producer.
Okay.
Yeah, he sucks, but it's okay.
I am terrible with pop culture. Yeah,
not
if it doesn't have
worth
to do with
your
like
time.
hip hop or I don't care.
Music industry over film industry every single day.
Oh yeah. If you ask me like, hey, have you seen this? No, I probably haven't. Like all of them.
And I'm not planning on it.
I've seen like one Star Wars. Anyway, all right, moving on. So house hunting. So Billy asks us, are there any top 60 players you're willing to buy at or above cost? If buying above cost, it must be for a reason. So he has two situations where if you are looking for a house, which I think, a lot of us have either looked for a house, bought a house, or thinking about doing that. We've all certainly probably been on Zillow. So you could look for buying an investment that'll grow or buying a fixer-upper, which is what we did. So here are some lists. If there's probably some other people that come to your mind, but let's go through the ones that he was talking about. So Marvin Harrison Jr. Are you so set on that Marvin Harrison Jr., a lot of people's wide receiver 1 in this draft, my wide receiver 2, very good player. Are you willing just to go, like, say you missed out on the rookie draft?
Yep.
Are you willing to go and just go get him?
It's interesting because I'm in a situation where I do own quite a bit of him across different leagues. And we're in one league together where I've put him on the trade block a couple of times just to see kind of how the value ranges in terms of what other people who are trying to buy looks like. And I would say majority of the market is still trying to buy at market value, which makes sense. I think that's generally how people try and buy. They don't try and spend too much because they think that they'll only be able to, recoup X amount of profit, quote unquote, later, which I don't personally believe in because I'm not here to make profit on all of my assets. I'm here to win football games, right? So my biggest issue, honestly, with specifically young players in terms of like over buying is that I truly don't know what their wins over replacement look like. And I have a really tough time putting myself in a situation where I want to buy something that I don't 100% know is going to be worth it, which, it's funny because you talk about this quite often, that a lot of the great profits that you make are based off of the ways in which you draft. And you've said this quite frequently. And I take a lot of value to that because if you're able to get these guys at value, which is truly whatever they went for in probably the rookie drafts, because they do elevate so much post rookie draft, you should probably sit with it until you can realize whatever that profit is. Or if your build doesn't go in the direction you want it to, then you can cash out, quote unquote. I just don't really see these types of players as a need to buy in immediately. I'd rather see them potentially falter or, minor injuries, things that will decrease their value in smaller windows and try to take advantage of it then than overpay right now. What about you?
Yeah, I think I'm there with it's very similar to the Dunze thing. Like right now, when I'm thinking about like first round rookie selections that we've made, like I don't think that training camp right now is the time where I'm going to try to spend up on a player. If I missed out on the rookie draft, like I'm perfectly fine waiting and seeing. Now, if Marvin Harrison Jr. does what I think Marvin Harrison Jr. could do, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna pay more for that. New build, fully remodeled, finished, everything, kitchen's done, sink's done, hardwood floors have been refinished, like brand new. I can move in and don't have to worry about anything. Marvin Harrison Jr. is not that right now. He's not a fixer upper, but he's more like when you're looking at houses and they have like new developments and you see the plan and the plot and it's like, okay, this is what it could look like. Like, I don't want to buy that either. Like, I want to see the thing. Like, I want to see the thing. I want to be able to walk inside the house and look at the house. And we haven't got that with Martin Harrison Jr. yet. We will see that. And once it's everything that you think it's going to be, then I'm more willing to spend a little extra to get something like that on my team.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And I think that conversation, unfortunately, kind of covers Malik Neighbors as well. I don't think that there's any different trajectory in terms of his value, except for the fact that there's maybe more Twitter videos about it.
Yes, every day, man.
I don't know if it's like the beat reporters for the Giants are just like all over Twitter or what it is. It's probably just because it's a larger media presence than Arizona, right? Like no one gives a shit about Scottsdale or Glendale, wherever they're based out of. People care about New York, even though they don't play in New York. And so that makes sense to me. With that being said, does that buzz or hype attract you at all? Does that make you feel like you have like FOMO on Neighbors right now?
No, because I'm smart and I drafted him in one of my leagues.
Good.
So
that's awesome.
It was our oh man, what was it? The League of Legends, I think.
Oh.
I think I had the 104. I woke up and just selected him because I know he's a boss. But yeah, I would if I walked away, like I know, like you said, you don't think that training camp, like you're not gonna buy into the hype, but like when you see like one dude who's a rookie just every single day making outrageous catches, and then they even training camp statistics are terrible, but like, hey, he was targeted 11 times and he caught 10 of them things. It's like, well, that's pretty good considering who his quarterback is.
Yeah, it's true.
And so yeah, like I would have FOMO. I just don't know if I want to act on that.
Yep.
And you might end up getting left behind if you don't act on it now. And if you don't, you're going to have to overpay. And I think that's okay for guys like that. What about Caleb Williams? What are your honest thoughts? How do you think this is going to play out for him?
I think it's such a challenging existence, mainly because he's going against the narrative in every single way, shape, or form, right? Like he is truly the villain from college football is what it feels like. And I think a lot of that unfortunately has to do with probably more so the parental component. I don't think that the parents have ever helped with that situation. I think he's going to a market that is particularly weird. Chicago has a great fan base, but I think in general, they're craving for success again, and they will literally back anybody to extreme levels. But that also means that if you don't perform at those levels, they turn relatively quickly. The coaching situation there isn't particularly good due to the limited success that has happened over the last, 7 to 10 years. And I do think that you're finding yourself a situation where I don't know how he handles that pressure yet. I know that he's an incredible athlete. I know that he is the true QB1 in this quarterback class. And I know that if he probably fell into maybe even a smaller market, he could probably turn that team around relatively faster. I just think that there's so many nuances to the psychological aspect of what goes on in Chicago that isn't going to be that easy for him to overturn, knowing his past. I would almost call it lack of success. I think like his own internalized success was great at USC. He had phenomenal stats, but he didn't really show the program what it was supposed to be getting to, like that next level of competitiveness. It never got there, right? Like we never saw it at that level.
Yeah.
And you can win as many Heismans as you want. people just give a shit about the trophies that actually reflect on the team, not on you as an individual. And so that aspect is still missing for me. That all being said, funny enough, I've I traded out of the 101 both times that I had it this off season, and I really thought that I got relatively good value in both those trades, and maybe that's just me kind of going with my own word to my point. I prefer the proven commodity, and in one of those trades, I ended up getting CJ Stroud and Sam Laporta. In the other trade, I ended up moving back, I think, a spot for Marvin Harrison Jr. actually, plus a first. And it's like, if I can do that, I'm going to do that every single time and just continue to hedge my bets.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you how you feel about those trades, but I think you're probably still feeling really, really good about that right now.
Yeah, I really do. I will tell you that drafting Marvin Harrison Jr. over Malik Neighbors was really challenging, and that's not because he went to New York. It's because, as you've seen, as everyone else has seen, my wide receiver one in this rookie class was always Malik Neighbors prior to him going to the Giants. When he went to the Giants, I definitely was a little demoralized about his regular dynasty and fantasy value, just because I did think that probably year one is going to be really challenging for him. But yeah, I think that trade was probably the more challenging of the two. I think getting CJ Stroud and Sam Laporta in a deal finds me in a much better situation than sitting here wondering what if with Caleb Williams.
Excellent. All right, next guy, Tank Dell. So I don't know if Tank Dell quite fits this, but like Tank Dell, so coming off an injury and a really good season that he had last year, what are your like? Are you trying to buy him? Are you trying to sell him? Like, do you think that he's going to come in here with the addition of Diggs? Nico Collins actually having a pretty good year last year, which I think is more like fool's gold. My bad. I'm not a Nico truther.
Yep.
I think Tank Dell's probably better than Nico. I know he's better than Nico. But are you willing to spend? I think he still has pretty good value. Is this somebody that you're willing to take a bet on, given all the added fluff to that wide receiver room, making it kind of, I guess, more like unknown? We're entirely sure how this is going to play out target wise. There's 3 good wide receivers in most people's eyes. If you are Team Tank Dell versus Team Nico and think that Diggs is older, it's somebody like this, someone that you would spend up on.
Yeah, I actually
word salad. My bad.
No, you're good. I actually am the one who added Tank Dell here because I found him in the top 60, and I was just like, that's a really interesting player in general, just to think about. Because to your point, he does have kind of that quote unquote like public ceiling. I think a lot of people believe that he is truly closed in on his value due to the circumstances at hand. Signing Stephon Diggs is going to make a major change on probably his usage. I do think, weirdly enough, this does still feel like one of those relationships that between him and CJ Stroud, there's just something there. There's a chemistry that you can't really define. And weirdly enough, I know it's dumb because you can't really look at any advanced metrics for this, but I do add value to that. And if I can buy in these kind of deflated bubbles, I do think that Tank, I think, was hovering around like the late 30s at one point last year before his leg injury. There's room for him to grow back up into that spot. And to your point, I do think that he makes and probably detracts from a lot of the Nico usage that occurred post Tank Dell injury. So what does that relationship look like? I think it only continues to grow for Tank Dell. I think it only continues to diminish for Nico. And by diminish, it's like, oh no, Nico is a 1,100-yard receiver with 9 touchdowns. Like, I'm not telling you that Nico is going to bust this year. I'm just saying that I think we need to take down our expectations because there are going to be a lot more individuals to throw to that just didn't exist there because of injury last year. What about you?
You said it basically. Okay. I mean, that's kind of how I feel. The interesting thing we'll see, we've seen Stephon Diggs, multiple teams, multiple quarterbacks be a very good wide receiver. We know he's got another year attached to his age.
Yep.
But I'm more interested to see the Diggs versus Nico usage here. I think Dell has, like you said, he has CJ's heart. When you see Well, you see him talk about other wide receivers like during the draft. He's like, "Oh, he's really good. Like I really wanted him." I think he's talking about Ricky Pearsall.
Yep.
But he immediately said he's like Tank. And I've seen other interviews where like he's talking about wide receivers and he mentions Tank. Like there is something there. One that doesn't really matter that much, but of course, I'm a Cowboys fan, so let's talk about the Cowboys. But Jalen Tolbert is a guy that like he spent the summer with Dak.
Yep.
And in training camp right now, there's no CD Lamb, so let's put that out there. But right now, I mean, Jalen Tolbert's looking like the closest thing to an alpha that they have right now. So it's something to kind of keep an eye on. I know that once CD's signed and everything's back, like there's only gonna be so much for Tolbert, but Brandon Cooks, I think, is probably on the last year of his contract. So if Tolbert does make that leap this year, I think that's somebody that you could get absolutely dirt cheap right now. That might be wide receiver 2 on one of the best offenses in the league. So
yeah,
something to think about.
That's completely fair. AJ says, talk about Brooks, Uriah.
He's also, I mean, so without CD Lamb being there now, Jalen Brooks, right? So
yes,
Jalen Brooks, then you have Johnson, you have a couple other guys that are doing stuff, but not at the clip that Tolbert's been doing it. And just not at the when watching them, like he's bodying guys, he's making one-handed catches, like full body control, little things that like it I think it's probably better for the NFL team than it is going to be for our dynasty rosters.
Yep.
Which gets me more excited than it's probably going to be exciting for you guys. But
sure.
I think at the end of the day, I don't think that Brooks really has a role. And 3 wide receiver sets. It's going to be CD, it's going to be Cooks, and I think it's going to be Tolbert. And then you also have Jake Ferguson there. So it's a lot to go around, but something to think about. But yeah, Brooks, I mean, I like the story. He's probably going to be around special teams and stuff like that, but I don't think that he's going to command any type of 200-300 yards, if that, for the season. So.
And in that same vein, since we're just talking about quarterbacks who love their wide receivers, the random wide receivers, I think to a lot of people, Romeo Doubs and Jordan Love seem to have some like weird connection that we can't really think about or know about because it happens behind closed doors, I guess. But it's so funny because whenever Jordan Love is specified to like answer a question about who's the guy he trusts, or like who's the guy to like go out with, or whatever his like best relationship is, it's always Romeo Doubs. And it's funny because to your point about Jalen Tolbert and a lot of other guys, I think they have so much value to the NFL team. I think Doubs is that guy. I just don't know what his ceiling looks like for a fantasy perspective, but I know for a fact that when QBs go out there and they tell you this, it means that they trust those guys in certain circumstances and to believe them. I think Doubs is a perfect example of a dude who could probably finish the year with like 750 yards and 10 touchdowns, right? Yeah. Like the usage is just going to show that in the moments that matter most, that's when Jordan Love will probably throw the ball to him. But everything else, he's going to go to the guy who's wide open, and that's going to be, your Jaden Reeds, your Christian Watsons, your Dontavian Wicks. It's crazy. I can probably list like another 4 wide receivers because that's also the issue in Green Bay, and that's one of the reasons why Romeo Doubs probably does have the capped ceiling that he does.
Yeah, I think one of the quotes or questions that was posed to him was like, okay, so you're getting married. Like, what wide receiver do you trust to carry the rings? And he said
that's Doubs. Exactly what it was.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And that's not the only time he's mentioned him, but also like just statistically looking at wide receiver usage there, I think Doubs lead like the team in targets, target share, red zone targets, touchdowns, like all that stuff, like quietly, which is really good for my bajillion% ownership. So,
cool.
Yep. And then last one, Dalton Kincaid. I put why though. I've never been a big Kincaid guy.
Yeah.
And I'm just not going to change yet. He has a chance to he has a really, really open shot here where you have just a rookie wide receiver. You have Khalil Shakir. Like these guys are not, true alphas. Like they're not like target munchers. I don't really know which target earners.
We'll go with that.
Yeah. Target muncher didn't seem quite. But yeah, Dalton Kincaid, he just has a lot of value in the community still.
He does.
Are you willing to pay up for him?
See, that's the thing is like personally, I'm also in the same boat. I don't necessarily believe the talent, but I do believe that the usage will probably increase in this next calendar year for the NFL season. And so I find myself potentially looking at a relationship of, can I acquire at a slightly above cost and then find myself potentially with the communities, not mine, but the community's tight end one. Like, I think the community has moved a little too fast. We've spoken about this, I think, in past episodes with tight end specifically. Like the fact that Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, and Dalton Kincaid jumped over Mark Andrews is kind of crazy to me, but it happened. It happened, and so we just have to adjust. But that is and Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is ahead of Mark Andrews, hasn't played it down yet. Kyle Pitts is also ahead of Mark Andrews. Like, the market has extremely died on Mark Andrews, but that's not the important part. I just think that Dalton Kincaid has a potential opportunity, specifically in this season alone, to acquire at and probably right around cost and still somehow find a way to exceed, where you don't find that with a ton of other players in and around that same range. Because we're talking about, tight end 3, player 35 on KTC. That's really hard to continue to grow from there, but I still think that there's probably that small marginal gap. Would I do it? Probably not. But I do think that he's someone that you could probably throw into this group of investment that can still grow within the top 60.
I love it. All right, next section. So the fixer-upper, which is the way to go when it comes to buying a house, by the way, unless you really value your time.
I don't. Time is not money for me.
Oh, I haven't been bored in like 2.5 years, so not really.
And there's a wall behind Uriah, so he's doing something right.
Yeah. Cowboys. Yeah. This room right here is the last one to get decorated. That's why it's echoey, but we're figuring it out. So fixer-upper. I like Jaden Daniels. I love the idea of Jaden Daniels because I think he really could be. I think he's a better pocket passer than a lot of like mobile quarterbacks. I'm unsure of the offense because Washington just. I don't care if you have a nice new wide receiver. I don't care if Dan Quinn's your head coach now, and he blew a lead in the Super Bowl and really shit the bed against Green Bay as a defensive coordinator last year. Do like the guy though. But I think, these guys, he has Jaden Reed, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. These are guys that we know the talent is there. We know the talent is there. We can see the potential. The bones are good. Like, as you talk about a house that needs fixed, the bones are good. Like, right or wrong, these are the type of players that I like to invest in. Like, Drake London has lost a lot of value. But Drake London is still really good wide receiver. I know he is. Kyle Pitts, I know he's a really good tight end. Like, you can't convince me otherwise. They have an upgrade in quarterback, possibly, most likely, offensive coordinator and all that. Are you more interested in buying into Jaden Daniels, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, those types of deals? We could talk about the other guys later because they're a little different.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, Jaden Daniels is such a hard one for me because he's already valued so highly. Like, you're talking about QB 12, which isn't that high, but player 28 or rank 28. I do see the fixer-upper terminology fitting here only because I do think that Jaden Daniels kind of falls into the same category of conversation post-draft as kind of like a Josh Allen. There was, so much of like the nuanced conversation of how he'll be able to perform because of his physical ability and how, we don't necessarily see him potentially as a pocket passer, which, to your point, I do think that he's a great pocket passer. And I think that there's been a lot of, incorrect conversations around the style of quarterback that he is because he also happens to be a particularly very talented rusher as well. Those two things don't negate each other. And for so many people, because they don't watch the tape, they do. And that just really, to me, just reads more so into the sports media aspect. But personally, I just don't think I can buy into Jaden Daniels right now because I need him to do that thing where a rookie quarterback hopefully fails for like the first 6 to 7 weeks. And I see that there's good bones there. And that's when I try the quote unquote fixer upper approach where, someone who drafted him with the 103 is shitting their pants. They're like, I might have just drafted the bust. There were 5 quarterbacks in the top, 15 picks. I might have drafted the worst one of the group, mainly because JJ McCarthy and Drake May probably won't be a starting quarterback during that period of time. But regardless, Bo Nix and also Michael Penix, but Bo Nix Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels will probably all be starters, and maybe Jaden looks like the worst one of the three. God forbid. That happens.
Well, let's hope.
Yeah, yeah, let's hope, because that would be the time to truly splash in. Drake London and Kyle Pitts, though, I do think are completely viable assets that I would be going for right now. Those are the types of guys that I would acquire. I've already acquired 2 Kyle Pittses, I believe. One was, I think it was DK Metcalf in a second for Kyle Pitts. And the other one was a first and a third for Kyle Pitts. And the first was for this upcoming 2025 draft. And I finished top 2 last year, and I finished top 3 the year before. So I'm feeling relatively confident that this year will be fine, as long as, injuries are on my side. I think at cost, it seems really cheap even now, because those trades happened probably a little over 45 to 60 days ago. His cost keeps going up the more camp tape that comes out. So
yeah, I mean, this is a good lesson too with Kyle Pitts. I know that Billy and I were pretty big on the situation where everyone's like Kyle Pitts 101. I saw Kyle Pitts go 101 in a startup, not a rookie draft. We always said, give it time. There's going to be a dip. It just happens with these rookie tight ends. If not Sam Laporta, for whatever reason, he's like, the unicorn. But there's always going to be the dip with these first round tight ends. And I think buying into Kyle Pitts when you did is probably like the best possible time you could have done it.
Yep.
I think even right now, it's probably worth it. It's probably worth going out and getting Kyle Pitts and you put your nuts on the table and it doesn't pan out. Like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that it wouldn't. But I think right now is a really good time. And Drake London is just another one where I'm like, man, just kind of thinking about his size and the success that players his size have had recently in the NFL hasn't been great. And I think that's the only thing. But other than that, like, I think Drake London, wide receiver 1 out of his class, in my opinion. Both these guys are, I think, perfect candidates for the fixer-upper.
Yep. Agreed.
All right, these next 3, maybe one's not quite like the other, but we have Treylon Burks. Treylon Burks is another guy. I had wide receiver 1 coming out. I think I talked about this earlier. I think he's been injured. Quarterback play has been terrible. Not saying it's going to be better now, but he does have YOLO, Will Levis. He's going to chuck it. And he's got the starting job. We're not sure, like, is Will Levis going to start? Is he the guy? Like, is he going to come? Like, he is going to be the guy, right? Until he's not. So I am a little excited to see what Burks could do there. There's not a whole lot of competition. He has a chance to really show that, yeah, maybe, I should have been wide receiver 1, 2 years ago. And then we have QJ. Obviously, I can't stop talking about QJ. But he's just another guy that, like, me personally, I thought the talent was there. Terrible rookie season. But it's making both these guys basically acquirable for pennies.
Yep.
At the super discount that you could get either of these guys, given their wide receiver 1 X alpha type build coming out of college and what they're able to do, are you willing to look at it and say, hey, he's got the stuff? Maybe whatever's between his years is a little bit better. Maybe a year removed, another year in the weight room, all these other type of things. Are you willing to buy in at cost on Burks or QJ?
Probably not.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think this is the fixer-upper that, like, the front door has been off, and that there's definitely a rat infestation, and that the pool definitely has probably hepatitis, and you need to get it a deep clean. And like, the kids are really excited, but then they get splinters everywhere because the wood floors aren't properly sanded down. Like, they have so many problems associated to why they haven't been able to be successful. QJ is obviously only a year in. Burks is obviously only 2 years in. I just think that both situations they're really challenging for me to see the success rate. And to your point, yes, they are basically pennies now, especially Burks. You can get him in some leagues for 4th. Like, I just don't know. We always talk about this, and this is now a Billy terminology, but championship tokens. I think I'd rather use that 4th to add on to another asset and get something better. than going for a Burks or going for a QJ just to try and get that deal done. Mainly because there's just a lot of other talent out there that I feel more confident in. And it isn't because I didn't feel confident in them going into the NFL. I just think that the circumstances are sometimes too overbearing for players to get out of. And of the two, I think QJ is probably in the better circumstance. You're talking about Burks competing with Calvin Ridley and DeAndre Hopkins, at least for this upcoming season.
Oh, Ridley's there. That's right.
Yeah, I just
Shit.
no, you're good. Like it's just
Edit that part out.
yeah, the non-live, it'll be clean.
Yeah.
But it is just challenging, I think, for both of them going into this year. But let's talk about the last one, DK Metcalf. I think that's a really good shout.
So yeah, DK, just kind of one of those guys. I think we talked about this market wise. Nobody really cares about the Seahawks right now because they don't have the Legion of Boom, and
Yep.
Geno is nobody cares about Geno, even though he's probably fine. So like DK is just one of those guys that like I feel like a lot of people would love to like get off him right now. In fact, I think we were talking like months ago. I'm like, I think DK is gonna be one of those guys that like gets moved a lot right now. Because I just think that there's so many people that are willing to take on what they see as a fixer upper, but there's probably so many people that are like, man, I'm really not happy with my purchase, or I didn't know when I moved here that there was a elementary school 2 blocks away, and these kids are keep coming through my yard, and or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a lot of like DK distrust, or people are soured on DK.
Yeah.
Are you soured on DK?
It's funny because I just told you that I traded him for another fixer-upper in Kyle Pitts. I think circumstances are really important in those two situations. Personally, I do believe that both should probably improve their roles in the coming year. And the reality is, if I can acquire a like 24-year-old tight end that I think could probably play until his mid-30s versus a 27 or 28-year-old wide receiver in DK Metcalf, I'm probably going to go for the 24-year-old tight end, especially in a tight end premium. And in that specific build, I am trying to go tight end bully. And so it added even more value to my team by getting the higher premium tight end than, the lower premium wide receiver. There's nothing wrong with that. With that being said, in other leagues, I would be more than happy to try and get a DK. I do think that he probably will still find himself hovering around top 10 wide receiver points per game. That's just kind of what he does. He's a little too boom bust for me, but you really are trying to play for upside in fantasy at the end of the day. So just because you get a 35-point game out of your, wide receiver 3 isn't something to go cry home about. That's something to be excited about. And I do think that DK probably brings that to your team and your roster. I guess like the thing that I would love to just kind of cover our tracks with is like, are there pros and cons to basically overpaying for that investment that will grow versus that fixer upper? Because like in my just like right off the top, I think that the pro is definitely on the fixer upper if you can buy at a reasonable cost. Whereas, guys like Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Jane Daniels, those smaller gaps you might find more pain points with than the Marvin Harrison Juniors, the Neighbors, and Caleb Williams and Tank Dells. But I think when we're talking about Burks, QJ, and even DK, I don't know if you're feeling that pain as much. And so that's kind of where I see the pros and cons. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. So it's kind of like like the Marvin Harrisons, the Neighbors, and the Williams. Those are guys that like, okay, you think you're buying a really complete product, and you're hoping there's not a lot of risk there. You're assuming that they're a finished product that you're just going to enjoy and reap the benefits on your roster for years to come. But none of them have played it down in the NFL, which I know doesn't really mean a lot. Everybody said, well, they haven't even played it down. Well, some of them are really good, and you don't really need to see them play it down. But we did say that about JSN. The guys that like, I think there's more value in taking the small, tiny risks on guys like Burks, QJ, DK, Drake London. I think there's just more. I think, like you're saying, like the sting. Like if it doesn't work out, you can kind of brush that off and be like, hey, it didn't work out. Like I acquired 2 shares of QJ at a price that I thought was fine, cheaper than I could have done a year ago. If
Yes.
if it doesn't work out, I think I'll still be fine with what I was trying to do there. And certainly Burks right now is another guy that like it doesn't cost you anything. So
Yeah.
um you can't do that like too many times. Like fourths and thirds, like keep throwing them away. Like eventually you're not having any fourths and thirds to like throw into other trades that could get you tiered up to somebody that's better. So um you could do it from time to time. But it would just be cautious to not do it a lot, I guess. Right? Like I don't want to go out there today and on the exact same team, go get Burks cheap, go get QJ cheap, and go get DK a little bit cheap. Like that could really mess you up. Um, so there are pros and cons. I just think that taking the chance on the lower valued asset right now that has more potential to gain value, I think it's worth the risk. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think it does. I think that's a great way to close out house hunting. All I know is that everyone should be house hunting at all times. It's just really dependent on what kind of asset you're looking for. And, it's up to you to define whether or not you're going to overpay or underpay. More often than not, people are not going to undersell. So just be mindful of that. But there's beautiful ways to work around that. So with that, let's go into underdog under the hood.
Okay. You want to do all these, or is there one
Let's just
specific you would
do,
like to do?
I think the top two is cool with me.
Okay. So, when making moves this time of year, do you think that you let camp hype sway you too much, or you act on feelings you've always had, but the camp videos are the ultimate trigger? We talked on this a little bit. I try not. Well, the things I consume camp videos and highlights and stuff a lot. Like I love this time of year just because we've not had football for so long. So like I'm just like really in it. And it's really hard mentally to like just be like, yeah, but it's against air and it's against pads, but you're a fan. So I try my best to not overreact on these types of things. Um, and I think the market in general doesn't do a terrible job at like really overreacting. So I think if you stay lockstep with market, I think you'd be just fine. I would never make a bet that I think is based on something I saw or some interview I saw. I don't think I'm going to go out there and spend 1.5x on something just on a hunch.
Yeah. So you think that you like when you go through that process, it's more so like I like what I see, but I'm only willing to acquire at basically whatever the market is currently telling me that that asset's worth.
Yes, and I mean honestly, like I'd be scared to make too many. Not scared, but yeah, scared to make moves based on these guys that are getting hyped, right? So because you're going into this trade negotiation with somebody else that also is in the same shit you're seeing.
That's true.
So I mean, it's really going to be hard to get these guys at market. Like you're going to have to pay a little bit more for it. And I think that in those situations, I probably will never find myself like pushing myself to get a deal done for one of them.
That's
As
completely
much
reasonable.
as much as I love watching it, I don't want to bring that into my dynasty roster.
Let's think about it the other way. Do you ever let camp hype on a specific player actually draw you to another player that isn't getting camp hype in that same team? So I don't know what a good example of that is, but for instance, in the Giants right now, there's an undrafted free agent in Dante Miller who's getting a way more hype for whatever reason than Tyrone Tracy. Like, is this a great time for people to, go after Dante Miller while you go and zag the other way and you say, you know what, maybe I'll throw out a late fourth next year and see if someone is maybe off of Tyrone Tracy because the Giants actually drafted him. Maybe there's a better role for him or something along those lines. And maybe that's a bad example because both those guys don't have that great of a circumstance for them to actually have that much value. But that's kind of the idea I was thinking about. Or like in Washington, Jahan Dotson hasn't really been spoken about, but we've seen a lot about Luke McCaffrey. Is that something like, would you try and go get Jahan because no one's really talking about him? Something like that.
Yes, no, that's a great way to actually look at this. Speaking of the Giants, I was thinking, Wandale.
Yes.
I like Wandale. Wandale had a very decent rookie season. Like it was not bad by any means. The offense wasn't great, and every time he was out there, he did okay. But you don't hear a whole lot of Wandale hype right now because you have Malik Neighbors doing his thing.
Yep.
And these other, these other players that they brought is, I think someone like a Wandale, Jahan Dotson, those are kind of the guys. Like, I think you're onto something there where all the new toys or newly acquired toys are getting a lot of hype, but guys that you've seen do enough, I think those guys are worth going after to get. I think Wandale's actually a really perfect example of that.
He's a great example. Chris Godwin, there's so much Jalen McMillan hype. It's like maybe this is truly another down, and it already is a down period, but like Chris Godwin down period feels like right now. Deontay Johnson, like if this isn't the buy window for Deontay Johnson, I don't know when is. It's like there's so much Xavier Legette hype. There's so much Jatavian Sanders hype, which we've already spoken about. And Jonathan Brooks hasn't even made it into practice yet. And he's going to take away a lot of hype as well. I just find that there's like so many circumstances with specifically in these wide receiver rooms where the new shiny toy will forever kind of outshine. And so maybe that's the time that you go out and acquire. T. Higgins is not necessarily as talked about as weirdly Andre Yashavash or Jermaine Burton. They both have been getting a ton of camp hype, but T. Higgins is a known commodity. No one talks about him because he is T. Higgins. Everyone spoke about him before. It was like, oh, is he going to sign his franchise tag or not? Okay, cool. He signed it. It's like, okay, let's stop talking about T. These are the types of guys that I think maybe they fit into these weird buy windows because there is, and by all means, I'm not saying Andre Yashavash or Jermaine Burton are the same equivalent of value. I just think they're like weird little micro windows where maybe T is now kind of dropping off people's radars and you can throw out an offer there to go acquire someone like that.
I love that. I think that's probably the biggest actionable takeaway from this whole conversation we've been having. I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah.
Because these guys that have produced, that we've seen produce, but they've been on the team for a while, right? We know who they are. We know they're good. We know that T. Higgins is good, but he's not getting talked about because he's not new.
Yep.
That is not something I've thought about before in Dynasty and acquiring players this time of year, but I think it's actually a good strategy to pursue.
Yeah, I agree. Not because I said it, but now because you repeated it and I heard my words through your mouth, I'm like, he said it way better than I did. That sounds really intelligent.
That's a rare.
All right. Last question. We don't have any trades and non-trades. So for Underdog Under the Hood, that's what we got.
Do you ever look at the best teams in your league to gauge what would be needed to put your team over the top or build to the level of top competition in your league market? Should you focus attention on trying to win leagues with more fragile contenders, for lack of a better term? So this is kind of like a marathon, or you're running the 400 meter or whatever. So you're trying to pace yourself with the guy in front of you, and you're just wondering if, okay, do I hold back here for this, the second quarter of the race? Do I just kind of limp along a little bit more? Do I know I could gain a little bit of steam later on and try to pull ahead? Maybe not the best analogy, but like you never want to be looking back at your competition. I think there's a lot of value in just seeing where the top teams are and what their build is like. I think a lot of times, honestly, I mean, I know it's true for me in some leagues. Like, I'm not looking at every manager's roster. And when I look at how they won, like, I didn't like, oh, well, Joe Schmo, he won the league. Like, he must have had a good team. But I don't think I've ever like really compared, nuts to butts. Like, how do I compare to this guy? Like, what do I need to get ahead? And I think that you probably should be doing that. Especially now, like it's different in season where you kind of look at like all play.
Yep.
And that's like a lazy way of like, oh, how do I stack up to this guy? But you can't do all play right now here in August. Here in August, you really have to roster compare. And I think there's a lot of value in doing that. Do I do that? No, I don't do that. And I think I probably should, because I feel like every year I end up having a less competitive team compared to maybe the top two, like, really good teams than I thought I did in the first place. That's because I wasn't really taking the time to be honest with myself and really compare rosters.
Yeah, no, I think that's, you know what? sometimes underdog under the hood almost feels like it's therapeutic. And I feel like you just did a lot of internal self-reflection. So I'm proud of you. I
Yeah,
think
I'm an honest guy.
I do think that there is a lot of value in doing this, to your point. And I agree. I think that there's multiple different phases of the season in which this does come to value. And most importantly, I think obviously off season, that is literally immediately as soon as you're done. I think as soon as your season is over is your off season. If you don't have a single more game left on your schedule, start looking at why your team has a gap compared to everybody else. And what is that gap? And how do I start, inching closer to fulfilling that gap? And that gap might just be general points. It might be general value across the team. It might be because you're in a rebuild and you know that you now have, 7 firsts over the next 2 years. Whatever it might be, make sure that there's reasoning behind that gap. I think for a lot of teams, they put together a competitive team, but it's not really a contender, right? It's like a top 6 team. And if you hover around there, and I think you've spoken about this a little bit with regards to
Console Wars.
Console Wars, yeah. You've kind of just been like hovering around, that top 4 or 5 in your division, and it doesn't really get you anywhere because of the way that playoffs work, specifically in that league. You can find yourself in top 5 and not make the playoffs. And it's just like, what do I need to do to actually get myself to the top 2 in my division? Is that even good enough to then compete against the top 2 in another division? Sometimes it's not. And it's good to be conscientious of that as well. So to your point, it really does kind of have multiple moments. And I do think that one of the best times to start selling in leagues that don't have trade deadlines is in season. So if you know that your season's done, start thinking about how you're going to gain those points moving forward, whether that is through some type of rebuild strategy, whether that's through acquiring picks, and then maybe even flipping those picks into proven commodities. Whatever it might be, have like a legitimate plan. But here's the biggest thing that I've noticed with a lot of people that I've spoken to that are just kind of getting into Dynasty. It's like, don't go into this plan with specific players in mind. Like, the idea isn't, I need to acquire AJ Brown to make my team better. The idea is to acquire a certain range of points. Who are those points via a player, right? Like, I'm not trying to acquire Amon St. Brown. It's not because I don't like Amon St. Brown. It's because I need Amon St. Brown's points, not specifically Amon St. Brown. And so that's really the only thing that I'd really take away from this is like, yes, you absolutely should be looking at the best teams in your league and trying to gauge whether or not you need to get your team to that next level. And secondly, I do think that you should be trying to prevent yourself from being a true fragile contender. Like, I think that there's just enough value in having just the right amount of depth. And when I say that, I mean having probably a single isolated extra player that can basically slot into any of your starting positions, including quarterback. There's always a ton of value in having a true QB3. There's always a lot of value in having at least a running back 3. There's always a ton of value in potentially having a wide receiver 4, even though I know Tommy right now is probably rolling over right now in his home. But I do think that there is value to that as long as you build your team appropriately. And obviously it matters with regards to your lineup settings and things like that. Those numbers will probably hover in different ways, but generally speaking, that is kind of the way that I envision that. And yeah, I think Billy brings up a really great point. Be mindful of who you're competing with, because if you're not, you're going to continue to lose and find yourself probably hovering somewhere in that top 4 to 6 range, unfortunately. And, just not really knowing how to get to that next phase until it's maybe a little bit too late. So, do as much as you can.
I feel seen. I feel real seen right there.
That was Billy.
Is there anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here?
No, we did a great job. I don't even know who Billy is, so
he'll be back.
He'll be back.
All right. Well, I should have said this at the beginning, but join our Discord. It's free. It's pretty active and a lot of smart folks in there. A lot of activity. Follow us on the Twitter box at Dynasty Underdog, at Uriah Dawkins, William FF, and at Jake Abrams. And check out the stuff we do on YouTube. We appreciate it. Like, subscribe, all those things. Other than that, y'all have a good night.